with Dan Cockty, who's a engineer, computer genius, worked with Apple, was one of the founders. And we're kind of going to go over a subject we've been kind of mulling over for many years, a decade at least. Um, what happened at the Twin Towers on 9/11? So, Dan, what are some of ideas that you have about the collapse of the buildings and what happened there on 9/11?
What the heck happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, I should just say that my dad was in the architectural materials business, and he sold acoustical tile and drywall for US Gypsum Company. And he was in on the World Trade Center, and he took me there while it was under construction because
Wow.
he got a huge. My dad had the purchase order for the drywall of the elevator shafts.
Wow.
So, so from an architectural point of view, we were all so fascinated at how those buildings collapsed. Seemed kind of far-fetched the way they fell down straight. And but then it's worth mentioning that a year, maybe a year and a half after 9/11 happened, so it's now 2002,
Right.
2003, there was a 2-hour documentary that came out titled Why the Towers Fell. And it featured the chief architect, the Japanese guy who designed the buildings,
Oh, really?
who was highly credible, right? He designed it, he knew better than anyone else. And he talked about how the cement floors were held up by these little steel brackets. And when the plane hit and the brackets got softened, all it took was one of the heavy floors to fall. And that started the domino effect of pancaking that each floor had added more kinetic energy so that such that the floors below couldn't withstand the kinetic force. And that's how the towers came down. That was plausible. I thought, oh, good. Explained. It's explained.
Right.
But then more years went by. Me personally, I was a skeptic about any further topics. And then I went to hear David Ray Griffin at the 9/11 Film Festival in Oakland. And David Ray Griffin is just like a kindly white-haired grandfather explaining history to you, completely non-threatening.
Uh-huh.
And he talks about how every major conflict the United States has ever been in. And he talks about the PNAC document, which was the neocon published a 50-page document explaining my connection's unstable. Anyway, I'll stick to the topic. I did 3-hour-long shows about 9/11. One of my shows had Richard Gage, who is the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Okay.
Right.
So he now has many thousands of architects and engineers saying, no, buildings don't fail this way. This is controlled demolition. That's the short subject.
Okay. Well,
Okay. The average person has no idea why these buildings fail.
I know I was an investigator and
It's complicated.
No, but I worked with NIS and FBI and DA offices on murder investigations, and I was an investigator for a while. And I'm incredibly cynical about everything and suspicious about anything. And I just assume everyone's lying as soon as I hear the stories. And that's my approach to it. So I'm not saying, well, this person's lying because they're wear blue shoes and this person's lying because
I'm kind of in your
purple
camp.
shoes.
Yeah.
I just figure everybody's lying. And really, probably everybody's lying a little bit for their own self-interest. But first of all, on Building 7, which is associated with the Twin Towers, that fell down. And what was interesting about that, there was a television newscaster who said, well, Building 7 fell down. And then she said, oh, that's not going to happen for like 15 minutes. And then it fell down 15 minutes later.
Right.
Then there was an FBI agent who was retired and became a private investigator. And one of his snitches was in federal prison, was a Muslim. And he was in lockdown when he went to go and get some information from him. And then after 9/11, he came back and he goes, yeah, we were locked down 2 months before 9/11 because everybody knew this was going to happen. So that meant all the Muslims, whoever they worked for, which is hard to say, ISIS works for whatever intelligence agencies they work for. I don't think they're independent. And then you've got the FBI knew about it. So everybody knew about this about 2 months ahead of time, according in like my own little private investigator investigator were. So it was knowing that something was going to happen. Maybe not exactly how, but when was pretty much understood. And then you've got some folks who were
Right.
very owners who took out double indemnity insurance policies right before it happened. So they knew it was going to happen.
Silverstein,
You
Larry
had a lot of
Silverstein.
people
Yes,
who
very suspicious.
a lot of people took the day off, right? Who were kind of in the know. There was like reportedly 3 or 4,000 people who just happened to take that day off. So it seemed like they knew ahead of time. And then when you kind of look at the people who did the flying, and then they dropped a passport a block away from the building. I mean, that's what we call, you know, in the olden days when you had I'm going to sell you a gold mine, you would take a musket, right? And you would take some gold and you would put the powder in there and you'd shoot the musket into a rock and there'd be some gold in the rock and you'd tell the rube, oh, there's gold in them there hills. Well, dropping a passport from a plane that's going into a building going 600 miles an hour and it doesn't get destroyed and it just happens to tell the whole story, that's a planted piece of evidence to a cynical guy like me. Then you go, well, that's okay. That could all be a
Yeah.
coincidence. What about the steel girders? Let's take a look at them. I'm sure they'll have forensic guys look at them. Well, those all got hauled away
Mark, I can tell you,
and sent to China.
that's right. You could
down
list 100.
They all got melted down immediately.
Yes.
So it was one thing. It was kind of a cascade of, like, when I'm in front
That's
of
a crime. You know what? It's a crime.
No,
It's a
but I'm
crime
just
to
saying-
tamper with evidence.
Okay, but I'm just saying, like, once again, I've got to say this is an attorney advertisement. Nothing here is legal advice. But when I'm in front of a jury, what I would say is that I would say, look, if something happens once, it could be a coincidence. It happens twice, it could be a coincidence. 3 times, okay. The cookie jar is broken, okay. And then you've got some chocolate on your mouth. Well, that's a coincidence, right? And then you've got like a cookie in your pocket. Well, that's another coincidence. But then, you know, the thing is, like, there's 13 cookies gone. That's the 4th. When you get past the 3rd coincidence, then you start to tell a jury,
Right.
usually there's 2 or 3 coincidences explainable in a row. But when you get to the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, so I kind of started kind of like a 7th, 8th, or 9th coincidence. And that just makes me very suspicious of the whole situation. And also it was the brothers of the Bush, one of the Bush brothers in charge of the cameras, and they all happened to be turned off, kind of like the Epstein cameras got turned off right during that day. They lost their video feeds. So I think there's, from what my understanding, there was 7, 8, 9, 10 coincidences in a row. And that just makes me very suspicious. Now the evidence is gone and we'll never know. So it's all conjecture. But when you have that many coincidences in a row, it makes me a little suspicious. That's all, you know. So what do you,
as it should.
and but you said we've got many engineers who looked at this and said that it doesn't make sense that you'd have such a neat folding of the building with a couple planes crashing into it. Right.
So one of the last of the 3 shows that I did about 9/11, I had a structural engineer friend of mine on, and you know, as a structural engineer, she thought it was obvious that the building had to be controlled demolition because the damage to the building was asymmetrical.
Right.
Right. The plane didn't punch a hole all the way through. The plane destroyed one side.
You would think it would have folded, kind of, you know.
But the failure was symmetrical, which could not be possible. Really, couldn't be explained because it couldn't happen.
Well, it wouldn't be.
But then you get into the bigger. What's that?
I said it wouldn't be attributable to a plane crash. If it was a plane crash, you'd think you'd have kind of a folding, right? And there would be some swaying or something. This was neat as you could be. It
wouldn't go straight down.
Neat as a pin.
Would never go straight down.
Yeah. So it seemed very
well. The thing that people were saying right away is that a steel framed skyscraper has never in history failed due to fire. Never, never, ever happened. Okay. And there are fires that have burned continuously for more than 24 hours. And the steel structure conducts heat, so it never melts.
Right.
And it wouldn't melt. And kerosene can't anywhere come close to melting it. Now, if the floors were held up by these little brackets, right, you could imagine the heat softening the brackets, which I'm sure did happen, but that would not have brought the building down. You would have seen a partial failure. Anyway, so many topics to discuss. There,
So on a scale of
you
1 to
know,
10, how suspicious are you that the 9/11 buildings didn't fall down just from the plane crash?
10 of 10.
You're very
I
suspicious.
mean, 10 of 10. It was controlled demolition. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got to wrap up. I think that's our sixth
Well,
episode.
wait. But back to Building 7. The other thing about Building 7 that is so notable is that it fell at free fall speed, which would not be possible unless you took out all the supporting columns with controlled demolition.
And I think they lost all the videotapes for Building 7. And also there was a bunch of lawyers conducting a bunch of depositions, and there was a bunch, like, billions of dollars missing for some kind of Rumfield thing, and that all just coincidentally all happened. All that evidence happened to disappear. So, a lot of evidence just happened to disappear there. So that was another coincidence. That's your number 10 coincidence. I would say that there was, 10 coincidences in a row. That's more than my rule of 3, and I think it's very, very suspicious. So I think we kind of agree on that one. Okay, Dan, we got to wrap up, and so I hope to have you on another time. We'll talk about some other topics, but I think that was great to have you on. I want to thank everyone for coming on and watching Dead On tonight, and hope you'll tune in again. All right, good night.